everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be discussing another BDSM 101 topic, but I'm actually not really entirely sure that this belongs in that category. It's not something I think a lot of people are aware of, and it's certainly not something that I think a lot of new people would be attracted to. But it's still a general category of BDSM play, so I think it might make sense here. It's certainly a little bit off the beaten path though, because what I want to discuss is boredom play. Yes, you heard that correctly. Boredom, on purpose, as a form of play in BDSM, and I'm going to explain why, so don't worry if it doesn't exactly make sense to you right now. And honestly, the process for this video really reminded me of what I went through when I was researching the one that I did on praise kink and affirmation play. With praise kink, it was something where I might see like little nuggets of it on Tumblr or in fan fiction or on a blog, but there wasn't a lot of concrete information out there on how to do it in real life in a BDSM capacity. It was purely all fantasy. And this subject took that even a step farther. There wasn't even fantasy or fan fiction out there about it. I tried my best using all of my Google knowledge to try and find anything that talked about this as an on-purpose type of play that one would willingly engage in. Instead, all I ended up finding were things like how to keep your BDSM from getting stale, how to make it spicy in the bedroom again, just like anything about avoiding boredom. That was really the only thing that turned up. So I guess I might have invented a form of play. I don't think I have. I just think that maybe it's really uncommon, and maybe people use different labels for it than what I am typically used to. And with that, I'm just really reminded of how important it is that we start off with a definition, because clearly almost nobody knows what this is, and I'm sure even for you guys who have seen the title of this video, you're still kind of like, okay, Evie, I don't really get what you're talking about, so let us actually define this terminology. When I talk about boredom play, what I am referring to is a type of consensual BDSM activity where a bottom, an S-type, a submissive of some kind, is being compelled to complete a task or engage in an activity that is not mentally stimulating or rewarding, i.e. is resulting in a feeling of boredom on purpose. Now, this is not about hating the thing that you were engaging in. It's not even really about disliking it. I think if anything, the types of play that would create a sense of boredom are ones that don't have a lot of meaning behind them, ones that are not, again, mentally engaging, things that you're sort of just indifferent about and don't really see that much of a point in doing on your own. And this could be something that's done outside of a power exchange context. It could just be in a top-bottom play scene, but typically I would see this more used as a tool within DS relationships. And now that I've talked about what it is, why do people like doing this? Why in the world would somebody enjoy feeling bored? Well, I'm going to talk more in detail about a couple of these later, but just to kind of give us a baseline to start with, a lot of people enjoy this because it gives them a very complete sense of surrender because they have no internal motivation for what's happening. It can be a sort of endurance test mentally for how much you can withstand of not having a lot of stimulation of things to occupy your mind. And it can also be a really great way of cutting the cord. We have so many demands on our personal time from our computers, our phones, the drama that's going on Twitter, that really being forced to occupy your mind with only one really simple or not that engaging task for a long period of time can really actually help us disconnect from all those things in our lives that would normally occupy ourselves, that we would normally think about, oh, I'm going to check my phone every 5 minutes. And suddenly when you can't do that for a couple of hours anymore, it becomes something where you can really let go of that constant need to reinforce that dopamine hit by constantly, checking your notifications on Instagram, for example. And when it comes to boredom play, there are many different ways that you could choose to engage in this. It's a little bit like punishment in that it is variable based on the individual person that's participating in it. What is punishing for one is rewarding for the other, and what is boring for one is something that somebody else enjoys doing. You know, there are some people that absolutely hate folding socks, and there are other people who folding socks is their favorite part of doing laundry. So it's something you have to kind of calibrate to whoever you are engaging in this with, and that is something that's going to come up in negotiations. But some general ideas that I can give you are things like this. So for example, you might have a giant jar of jelly beans where you have to individually count all of those jelly beans in your head. No pen and paper, no estimating. You have to figure out the exact count of every single one of those jelly beans. Or maybe your partner takes a big old bag of rice or glitter and dumps it out into a high pile of shag carpet, and you have to individually pick out every single one of those little tiny grains. Or maybe it's something where you're given a really simple task, like maybe you have a 4-piece puzzle that you have to solve, and then you're left in a room and given an hour by yourself to complete it. I'm gonna guess those other 58 minutes after you've solved the puzzle are gonna be pretty boring. It could also be something where you are just told to sit and wait for an indeterminate amount of time without any stimulation or anything else that you can engage in. Or maybe this is something where you have a really big ball of yarn or an old phone cord or rope that's super knotted up and just absolutely gnarly, and you have to take the time to completely unravel all of those knots. Now you might look at some of the things on this list and go, geez, these are all things that sound a lot like punishments. I mean, having to sit in a corner for half an hour without doing anything else is pretty boring, and also writing lines is pretty boring too, so where is that line between what is punishment and what is boredom play? And what I would say is that boredom can be used as a form of punishment. The reason why those things are punishing is because feeling a sense of boredom or feeling a sense of disengagement is not pleasant. It's not something that we enjoy experiencing. But with punishment, I think there at least should be some sort of underlying reasoning behind it that could be preventing a bad behavior from occurring again in the future, or reinforcing a dynamic, or having a correction after a rule is broken. There's some sort of reason why that is happening, and after that task is completed, it has been rectified because you have sort of made your amends and everything is going to go back to normal if it's a punishment situation where, say, a rule is broken. And what I think makes pure boredom play so pure is that it doesn't have that underlying meaning behind it. It's almost sort of a cosmicist sort of way of thinking about engaging in BDSM, where there isn't that underlying meaning, there isn't that purpose behind it, and that's what makes it feel so boring and so awful. Is the only reason you are doing this is because your partner wants you to. Again, it's all external motivation here. It's not because you enjoy it or because you find it satisfying, anything like that. It's purely because your partner wants you to do it. And for the right person, that can be very compelling. That can create a wonderful sense of submission and control and all of that wonderful stuff that a lot of people really enjoy about submission. Again, it's not for everybody because none of these types of play I talk about on my channel are for everyone, but for the right person, it's something that can be very motivating and reinforcing to a dynamic. So to give an example here of the difference between a punishment and a non-punishment form of boredom play is going back to writing lines. So for example, in a punishment scene, you might be compelled to write lines that say, "I will not talk back to daddy." Whereas if you were doing that same thing in a boredom play setting, it would probably be something nonsensical or something that doesn't really have a lot of value. So for example, bananas are on sale for 99 cents on March 13th. Like just something that, again, doesn't really have a lot of depth to it, something that's not really going to make you think about a whole lot, because there's only so much you can think about with bananas being on sale for 99 cents. And hopefully this is giving you guys a little bit of a better picture of how all of this sort of play works. And what I want to touch on again here is in more detail the motivations for why people enjoy this type of play. I think obviously again there is that component of within a power exchange dynamic having that complete sense of surrender and control, that very selfless form of service where the only reason this is happening is because your partner wants to have this happen, not because you really enjoy organizing or you love washing cars or you love doing the dishes. It's purely about whatever your partner wants. But it doesn't have to be limited to just power exchange relationships like I've mentioned before. If you are an emotional masochist, boredom is a very painful emotion. It can be absolutely excruciating. So similarly to how, say, a physical pain-focused masochist might really like caning or spankings, people who are emotional masochists might enjoy the feeling of boredom. If you are somebody who is into humiliation, you can absolutely make boredom play a very humiliating process, because basically what this is communicating is you are not even worthy of completing any task of value to me. The best that you were worthy of is this completely nonsense task that doesn't mean anything and isn't bettering you as a person. You are so low to the ground that the only thing you're capable of doing is this stuff that doesn't even matter in the long run. And for the right person who is really into humiliation, that just sort of very specific way of feeling humiliated can be like the best thing in the world. And on the flip side from this, it can actually be very meditative. I've already touched on this a little when it came to the cord cutting aspect of boredom play, but as well, it is very different from the typical high stress, high value service that a lot of people do. If you're in a service dynamic where you, say, have to iron all of the important business clothes and fold all the laundry very properly, and you have to set the table a certain way, and you have to have coffee prepared at this exact temperature, this exact time, it can be really stressful to live up to those expectations. Compare that to a situation in boredom play where the thing that you're doing doesn't really have a large amount of outside value. It's a lot easier to relax into that and sink into that and allow yourself to kind of enjoy doing the task of service, because there's not that fear in the back of your head of failure. And compared to something where, say, for example, you might accidentally prepare a really bitter cup of coffee or accidentally burn somebody's shirt on the ironing board, when you're doing something like just counting jelly beans, there's not really a lot of stakes behind that. It's a lot less stressful that it gets done correctly, because nobody's really going to be hurt if you miscount the jelly beans by like 3 jelly beans. I mean, there might be a punishment because of that or some other kind of negative thing as a result, but it's not nearly as important as a lot of the everyday service tasks that somebody who's in that relationship style might have to do. And being able to relax there, being able to have something that's a little bit less stressful, can be really invigorating for people that are used to having a lot of anxiety and worry about doing something absolutely perfectly. And boredom play, while pretty good by itself, also pairs really well with several other types of play. I mean, I've already mentioned humiliation for one. It's sort of like pairing a really good whiskey with a really good dark chocolate. So some of the things that I like to pair it with would be sensory deprivation and bondage. I'm sure you guys are so surprised by that, but really, they're so versatile. So, you know, already having to count jelly beans from a jar, like, that can be pretty boring, and it can be something that takes a long amount of time. Now imagine having to do that blindfolded or wearing a pair of mitts. Yep, it's probably going to take you a lot longer than it did when you had all of your digits and all of your faculties available to you. And this change can definitely add a little bit of a different texture to your boredom play scene. So rather than it just purely being a boring experience, it might kind of turn it into a little bit of a fear scene or a panicky scene or something that really, really provokes a sense of helplessness where you're like, oh my god, how in the world am I ever going to be able to untie all of these knots when I'm wearing these stupid fist mitts? How in the world am I going to be able to do that? And again, some people are really, really into that kind of feeling. And you might have heard all of this that I've said so far and go, Evie, I thought BDSM was supposed to be about having fun. None of this sounds fun. And while I think on a basic level, having fun is important to the reason why a lot of people do BDSM, the fun and the joy that we experience is not always so direct as I like the thing that I'm doing exactly right now in this moment. There is something to be said for the sort of golden halo that you get as a service submissive when you know that you're doing something that is completely selfless, that you're doing something that is only purely for your partner's pleasure. And some people are really into that. They enjoy being able to say that I did this only because it was for the person that I love or the person who's my dominant. You might even kind of think about this as like the opposite of chasing subspace. So with chasing subspace, you're really, really trying to provoke a sense of direct physical pleasure. And this is almost like trying to avoid that. You are getting pleasure specifically because you're not getting pleasure, and in fact, you're so not getting pleasure that you're bored with the situation. It's confusing, it's convoluted. I'm not expecting anybody to understand that right outside of the box and without having experienced it for themselves, so hopefully you can just take my word for it that, yeah, some people like this. It might not really make sense to you, it might not be your kink, but hey, that's life. Not everybody has all of the same kinks or understands every single motivation for why somebody might enjoy something. And boredom play in general, just as a final note here, because I always have to talk about safety, is generally not a risky sort of play. It's not the same thing as doing, breath restriction or handcuffs, things like that, which can actually be quite risky. However, there is one thing to know about it, and that is in general, when you are engaging in tasks that involve very little stimulation for your brain, it's best to contain that within at most like a few hours at a time. If you're doing like a whole weekend long boredom scene, there might be some potential adverse effects because of that. Just something to be aware of. If you want to Google it, if you want to look it up, there are videos of experiments that they've done with like solitary confinement and with like restricting people's sensory input for really long periods of time, and it does really affect people. So that's something to be aware of. That's probably the main risk that you would want to take into account when you're planning the scene. Like start out with like 10, 20 minutes at a time maybe, and then work your way up from there, because like if you're not used to being bored, if you're used to being really occupied all the time, even just like 5 or 10 minutes of boredom can feel really, really intense. So make sure that you are taking the time to ramp up to longer and longer scenes, not just being like, okay, well, I guess this weekend I'm gonna lock you up in the basement and you're gonna have a bowl of water and some gruel and nothing else, and that's it, and find a way to entertain yourself. Like, that can be way more intense than most people can handle, that most people would enjoy doing. So, take it slowly. You don't have to go full on prison solitary confinement scene yet, although some people definitely do engage in that for sure. Not something that everybody should start out with though. So those are just some things to keep in mind. Hopefully some of this made sense. This is a really complicated video to do because it's not something that a lot of people talk about. So I really, really hope that something in this video spoke to you, helped you kind of understand this frame of reference maybe a little bit more than what you came in with. If you have any other comments or questions about this type of play, I would love to hear from you. You can leave that down in the comment section below. What else would you like to see a BDSM 101 video on? I have like dozens of ideas, but sometimes it's kind of hard to know where to start, so I would love your feedback. Again, you can leave that in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week. And as well, if you haven't already, please do also check out my Patreon. Link to that will also be in the description box below. And that is what funds this channel. That is what makes all of this possible, all of these videos, and it also allows me to give you guys bonus content. So extra videos, photo shoots, extra live streams, all of that. So if you haven't already, please do check that out. If you already support me over there, thank you so, so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you guys next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.